So at 6:47, we will recess the regular school board meeting and move into the public hearing for the 2023-2024 budget hearing presentation. So Mr. Lewis, you are back on.
Thank you, Chair Scott, members of the board. This is the first of two public hearings that you will have on the budget. Only one public hearing is required by law, but you asked for multiple opportunities for the public to be able to review the budget, the draft budget, and to be able to comment on the draft budget. So this public hearing is the first one. The second one will be at the July board meeting. We will follow all of the rules and requirements for the second public hearing, including putting it in the newspaper, advertising it on our website. But this is the first shot at the draft budget. It was provided, a link to it was provided in the packet. It's included on our website. And this is going to be, I think, a slightly different presentation and budget presentation than you've seen, at least for the last few years. Quick summary of the budget. The draft budget that's before you has a ending fund balance of 1.4% of current year expenses. Your policy for minimum fund balance is 6% for next year. You waived that for this year, so that is one thing we're going to have to make sure if you adopt this budget, you're going to have to help us out a little and waive that policy for another year. The enrollment estimate that is provided, I believe, is conservative. It's lower than the current year. It projects a decrease, not even. The last meeting that we had at the work study session, I suggested an even enrollment would be where what I would be bringing forward. Just looking at continued changes and what happened the last couple months of the year, I'm uncomfortable moving forward a budget that is even, so I dropped it by 30 FTE, which is consistent with the FTE drop between April and May, or April and June, sorry. So that isn't always what happens, but given what we faced last year and kind of the up and down nature of what enrollments look like, I felt like bringing forward a conservative enrollment number and being higher in September would be better than a number that you would have to adjust downward in September. Yes, Director Wilson.
What happens like if you budget for a certain FTE and you have more students? So we've kind of done.
Yeah.
You would just do a budget adjustment for like how does that work with OSPI so that we could be compensated?
We will be compensated.
Yes.
So OSPI provides the first several months, September through January, you are funded on enrollment based on your budget. And then at the end of January, they true it up based on your actual enrollment. So we'll be funded for every student that comes. I'm going to keep saying FTEs, and I'm sorry, I know they're real people, but in terms of budgets, for every FTE, we will be compensated from the state. And the amount the number of FTEs that come in over budget will determine whether I would recommend to the superintendent to whether we would do a budget extension early. If it's 30 and the students land in the right place, which means we have capacity in the classrooms for those students to come in without hiring a lot of staff, I wouldn't recommend a budget extension. I'd say let it ride. Let's hold expenses as close to where we are and utilize those resources to help build back fund balance. If instead all of those students happen to be kindergarten students, and we didn't have enough kindergarten teachers, and we had to hire kindergarten teachers, and there were 70 of them, which represents $700,000 of additional expenses and costs, that would be something that I'd probably recommend a budget extension. The budget that's in front of you provides no capacity on the expenditure side, which means that we'll be riding tight from day one, and if enrollment comes in right where we're at, there's really no capacity for emergencies. we have a HVAC system go out. We're gonna have to cut somewhere in order to make those expenses work. It's not optimal, but it is a reality that we're operating under with this budget. That's why if we did end up with 30 additional FTE and we didn't have to hire staff, I would be recommending hold tight, because that $300,000 is going to help us if an emergency happens in December or January. Additional staffing reduction since the last board meeting. We've had the superintendent has made a decision to reduce one additional district administrator. We've reduced one additional classified staff person in the district office and the fiscal department. And we've reduced one school office support staff in school at Pioneer specifically. And there are some minor corrections that are still needed in the budget, mostly accounting related. But you know, what I wanted to make sure is you had a first glance at where people were staffed, what the budget looks like, before I started making a lot of accounting adjustments for some of the changes. So this is where it starts getting, and I will start going faster, I promise this won't be an hour-long presentation on the draft budget. But what I did in the packet and what people can see online is the budget summary, but the actual pages from the F-195, the actual budget you adopt, and where these numbers come from in that budget document. It allows you to find those numbers. It allows the public to know the numbers that we're looking at. So page 1 is where you actually see all of the ending fund balances for each one of the funds. So you can see the general fund, the ending fund balance would be projected to be $723,000. ASD fund projected decrease in fund balance from $277,000 to $111,000. Debt service fund going from $5.4 million to $658,000 by the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to read all those, but this is where you would find the high-level expenditure authorization that the board would be granting the district, how much revenue we expect, the beginning fund balance and ending fund balance. Page 4 of the budget document outlines the actual enrollment and from 21-22, the budgeted enrollment from last year, and the budgeted from this year. And you can see in anything that's in your F-195 document, the state does not adjust the 22-23 budget figures based on your budget extension. It's all based on the original. So a little later in the slides, you'll see I gave you a comparison of expenditures and this year's budget to your budget extension, which is much more reflective of what we expected the expenditures to look like. Each one, local revenue, state revenue, and federal revenue, they didn't change all that much from the work session a couple months ago. The projections were very close, some minor adjustments. I think if you checked, you wouldn't see very many changes over the last couple months in this area. In terms of expenditures, I did want to give you a picture of percentages based on activities, a comparison of where our budget is compared to the state overall. In the last data we have from the state overall is the 21-22 school year, because that's closed books. 22-23 hasn't closed books. So, next year, if I'm smarter about it, I'll do the same comparison and only use like-sized school districts. Because one of the things that skews the statewide amounts is we have 30 districts that make up half of the enrollment in the entire state. And then a lot of districts that are super tiny, and it kind of muddies that when we're trying to do a comparison. But I wanted to give you a sense, we're not too different in terms of the percentage that we are spending in teaching. We're a little higher in the teaching category. 60% of our budget is direct teaching, whereas the state is 57.7%. We're a little higher in supervision and instruction than the statewide average. And I'll tell you, that is skewed because of very small districts with very small schools that don't have assistant principals. And then in terms of teaching support, we're lower there than in a lot of other districts, and that's because we focus our resources in the teaching area. So that's where most of that goes. And again, I'm not going to read through all of those. We're pretty close in most of the other areas. We don't have a print shop. We don't have a warehouse and distribution. That's why, again, a comparison to like-size districts is probably a little, would be better in the future. And if I get my act together, maybe I'll do that too. And the one thing I should point out is food service and transportation. You'll notice food service, we are more efficient, and one of the things that you'll have to approve in your contract or in the consent agenda is a contract with Sodexo. I think Sodexo has done an excellent job for us in terms of both quality and cost. And I'm not trying to speak ill of Durham, but contracting transportation is very different than contracting food service. Contracting transportation is very expensive compared to running your own transportation model. So we spend about 5.3% of our budget on a contracted transportation model. These charts are similar. They're updates from the charts that you received in the original work session. Secondary, this is district level reductions. I have a typo there. It says secondary level reductions. The district level reductions went up slightly based on those things we talked about at the very beginning. The superintendent decided to reduce one additional district office staff. We reduced one additional classified staff. We also were a little more efficient in negotiating some of the contracts here. So we are now reducing a little more than $1.9 million district level expenses. When we go to the elementary level, $1.2 million, mostly matching up our enrollment to our teaching staff. And then secondary reduction, same thing, a little more than two-thirds of the savings in secondary is reducing our staffing based on the reduction of the student FTE that we have. And this is that chart that I said, because the state doesn't prepare this year to your budget extension, I did that in this. This is the 22-23 revised budget, along with the year-to-date actual activity as of June 16th. That was the last possible moment I could run the report and get the data to Gwen in time to get it in the packet. That's the only magical thing about June 16th is that's when I had to run that report. So it gives you a sense of where we are as of essentially today, because we've only paid a couple bills since last week, and that we actually have done a significant amount of reductions in order to make this budget happen. But the reductions that we've made are pretty close to on track with our current year spending, which is again why I feel pretty good about. I hope we do end about $500,000 in the black. Want to move on to other funds, capital projects fund, because of the adjustment that was made early in the year. That budget is only for emergency expenses, and the impact fund fees in that budget are going to be going to help pay off the loan on McNeil Street property. The debt service, there is $0 of owed debt for 2024, and so the bond rate is going to decrease from $1.63 to 0. And the ASB fund, there is, you'll see later in the agenda, a recommendation to increase fees. There is going to be a reduction in their overall fund balance projected. We are pushing more, we're asking them to increase fees so that we can shift some costs that the district has covered into ASB and have it pick up costs like reconditioning, football helmets, pool rental, bowling alley rental, golf course rental, those types of things. And we've reduced the trainer instead of eliminating the trainer as was indicated earlier in the year. And again, I've just indicated the page numbers in case interested accountants behind me are interested in going and taking a look at the pages in the F-195 document. This is where you find all of the assumptions for debt service, for the ASP fund, and the capital projects. That's the extent of the presentation. I know very much longer than you're used to for a hearing. Sorry about that, but I think given where we've been, it's important to try to be as transparent and open as possible when we're making this public hearing. Thank you very much.